I
All
dare you.
right.
I dare you.
I
I know you hit recording. I dare
I'm
you.
recording.
I don't
You
care.
know, every time you ask me to do the
That's so
introduction,
true.
you guys just keep talking right over me.
Assert yourself, Will.
Yeah, that's okay. I can wait.
And if we wait for Andrew to finish that banana, we're going to be here a while. So just go ahead and just get ripping.
All right. So looking at what we're dealing with today, it seems that it has, highlighted one of the realities that we deal with in the church, and that is, oh shoot, we lost Andrew.
I think his office is slanted. Roll back, fight against the current. He's throwing away his banana peel. All right.
So we don't have people for their whole lives of faith, right? So we have people for certain periods of time, and it might be for one visit to the congregation, or it may be for 10 years. It may be longer than that, but my experience has been that it's not. And so it's not really about having a collection of Lutherans that are there for their whole lives, but it's more like, congregations are locations where people can gather while they're on the move, in their life. And so we only have them for a short period of time. It's not that we get to make people Lutheran, but it is that we get to expose them to Lutheran approaches, perspectives, teachings like that, whatnot, to impact them in their lifelong faith journey. And we get to be a part of it for a minute. So my question is, as pastors, what are the most important things that we have to pass along? And if we look at our congregations in that perspective, that they're constantly shifting, that they're nomadic, how best do we go about impacting people in their lives of faith?
That's a good question, Will. And I'm glad I was paying attention while you were talking.
Unlike Andrew, who left.
I was paying attention.
I thought we were friends. I really did.
Interesting question, Will.
Why? Thank you, Pastor Gugan.
I seem to connect with where you're coming from, I think, but especially in the congregation I'm in now, I don't know that I would call them nomadic, because it is, I would call it traditional. When we think of church, a traditional church, not necessarily, we're talking worship or things like that, but traditional in that part of the congregation, we're connected in one way or another to the founders of the church, which this church is almost 100 years old.
Wow.
But I mean, we've also grown a little bit in getting new members and things like that. But in some other congregations I've been in, that's kind of the way that it was. You really didn't have a lot of that, in a sense, history.
Mm-hmm.
You had these newer people, and I don't know that I've maybe experienced as much as you had with kind of a nomadic feel. But at the same time, and I don't know when it started for me, when I approach, we do have these people for such a short time. And when I think of that, I think of maybe not necessarily their time at the church, but their time at the church in terms of, how often they're here, that once a week or twice a month or twice a year or whatever.
Yeah.
But the approach is, and actually I think I've really dove into this more with this current year and COVID and virtual worship and things like that. Here we're Lutheran as we come together, but especially with that video camera, and then just in general, it's a larger question of how are you approaching your faith? Is that a faith? And how do you define that? Is that a faith in God, as Christians or Lutherans would understand that? Christians, Lutherans, just or is it something else? What do you have faith in? Maybe you don't have anything to do with church, whatever that definition for you is. But, how do you structure life, and how do you define, what are your boundaries? In a sense, what are your morals? So I think I've approached, at least I've tried to, in a lot of my messages, just for that larger audience, because I think that's what's important for us. Because honestly, I've heard too much of the well, I don't need to come to church to know right and wrong, or because that's all the church does. And I've just really been looking for conversation starters. And if people come here, if people come, let's say, to church outside this COVID world, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that was a nice worship, but as we kind of said off camera, I really don't want to listen to that person preach anymore, or that was nice, but maybe this isn't for me. Yeah, great. And just after all of these years of being in ordained ministry, I think I don't want to say become comfortable, but I'm more open to just say, hopefully there's a seed planted there for something, you know. Um, yeah, I think it's just trying to approach it from a larger scale. And as I said, this whole thing, this whole year of 2020 has really pushed me that way. Because, and as you've said before, when you preach, um, it's a lot of the stuff that you need to hear yourself. And I do the same thing because my faith is constantly evolving and I'm re-examining it. And that's the approach, again, that I took with my Reformation sermon. How are we constantly just doing this reform within ourselves and keeping our faith active? And what does that mean? That's my initial thought.
I guess like when the context of the worship service, though, the only thing that is not scripted for the congregation is the sermon. So for somebody who's coming for that experience for 1 week, they'll get a feeling of like the atmosphere of the people, of the atmosphere of the building. They'll hopefully God's spirit is there, working through us and doing things. But it'll either resonate with them or it won't. And we can say, all right, well, yeah, there could be different styles of music and all of that. But the only part that's really more fluid is the sermon. And so how much, I guess, this isn't an answer to the question, but to say, knowing that if we have these snapshots of people like Andrew has talked about, like it's not even just nomadic, but in the sense of how much time we have with people during the week, how do we, for us as pastors, how do we fit that into the sermon? How do we get across, if this might be the last sermon you ever preach, like if you knew this Sunday was the last sermon you were going to preach, how would you preach it differently? Like what would you say, like, this is, if I got one left, I want them to know this. And I don't know if that would change week to week. I don't know if it's like, if you just did that continuously, I don't know if you could do that. But I agree with what Will said, the nomadic thing of, we're not dealing with, like you said, we're not dealing with lifelong Lutherans. And that's okay. And what I've experienced is, even when I'm dealing with lifelong Lutherans, they forget a lot of stuff. So it's not like I can have people that have been in the congregation for 3 years who know more about Lutheran theology and Lutheran stuff than people that have been there for 40 years, because for them it's something that they were curious about, something they wanted to learn about. They're making the conscious decision to be a part of it. The person that's been there for their whole life is just like, this is just where I come on Sunday. So how do we connect with both groups of people? I will say the one thing that is positive is, I've found in my experience that people on both sides of that spectrum, if you can make it relative and applicable, they're actually kind of interested to learn about what we believe. Not confirmation students, but adults are like, oh, wow, oh, I always wondered why we did it that way, or our approach to this. I guess my answer would be, one, approaching sermons as if our message is, if this is the one thing they'll ever hear from me, how would I do that? And then two, how do I relieve some of the stress for myself to realize that it doesn't all rest with me, and it's not my responsibility to make anyone the perfect Christian. Kind of, I guess, with what you're saying, Will, like, it's my responsibility to be faithful this week. And whatever happens next week is whatever happens next week. But right now my job is just to share God's good news as best I can today. And next week, I hope to build off of that.
I agree.
You should. You wrote it. I was just reading it off the screen.
Yeah.
But yeah. So in there, Andrew, I would challenge your immediate assessment of your congregation You know,
Challenge accepted.
so, you know, what I have observed, and here maybe again you'll be better than me, but regular attendance for worship in people's minds this today is going once a month, you know, or maybe every other week. You know, that's I go to church
I
regularly,
think that's contextual though.
but I think that's nomadic as well.
So you're saying that would, as far as how you're looking at it, that would classify as being nomadic, that you don't get every week, that you get once a month, that maybe you get once every other month, that twice a year, that even though the person might still be a part of your congregation for 10, 15 years, it's not the same the way the system was built to operate. The system was built to operate weekly, if not multiple times a week.
Yeah. Well, it's like the lectionary. You know, the lectionary is built around the assumption that people are going to be there every Sunday.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get the story throughout the seasons in a progression that, you know, is
tell the story.
Yeah. You know,
and even, to that point, Will, like the shift over, I don't know what year it changed, but from Palm Sunday to Passion Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, and saying like, all right, well, you know, for people that aren't aware of it, you know, the Palm Sunday being the first day of Holy Week and Jesus's triumphant entry into Jerusalem. And at some point in the last generation or two, the church shifted to a lot of them making that Passion Sunday. And they didn't do it just because they felt like doing it, but they do it because to celebrate it solely as Palm Sunday implies that someone's going to be there for Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, and if you have an Easter vigil. But so many people were coming Palm Sunday, triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and not coming back till hopefully, or coming back on Easter, another triumphant thing, and they were missing the in-between stuff. So the church was like, no, we can't have that. We got to make sure we cram the crucifixion down their throat one way or the other. And if they're not going to come Thursday and Friday, we're putting it on Sunday. But even now, that's.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
Keep going. No, keep going. No, keep going.
No, what comes to mind for me then, Will, is okay. So people are coming once a month. So okay, but that's, you know, I think about all those churches where, you know, where it was the Methodists, right, where they rode around, and they're only at a church, maybe the pastor's only there every 6 weeks.
Right.
Sometimes
Circuit
there's
riders,
nothing. Yeah. And there's certain, and sometimes there's nothing in between. It's maybe lay led or whatever. And it's like, oh, the pastor's coming this Sunday. That's great. You know, and I think of Jesus. I mean, people, you know, people might have followed him around, but, you know, if you're like me, and I'm not someone that's going to be walking all these miles to listen to Jesus, I'll be like, oh, well, he's going to come back around, you know. And, you know, and I think for me, I approach, at least I try to when I preach, that where I do make connections where it's like, oh, well, you know, last week, you know, we heard this and it connects to this week. Where a big thing for me and all the churches I serve, I think they kind of make fun of me because I'm like, it's all about connections and see how this goes with this. But at the same time, it's like, I try not to write sermons or to preach where if you miss 3 days, if you miss 3 weeks, you're not going to be lost. For the only analogy I can think of is a soap opera.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. That it's so tied together.
And then in no way does that define my preaching either. I don't want people thinking, oh, well, Andrew preaches like Days of Our Lives.
You do. I've heard them, and that's okay.
And I don't want to make it sound as if this is, you know, good or bad or right or wrong. Yeah. I think it's a reality, you know, and the fact that people show up at all is a gift, right? It is a privilege. It is an honor to be able to be church with people when they are there, right? And, you know, we can lament that it's not the way that it was in the 50s and 60s, maybe, but you know, I'm not really interested in doing that. It
doesn't get you anywhere.
I think there's a fair bit of what we do that is still kind of based off of that assumption, though, that is not helpful.
Right.
But, you know, so like one of the things that I've started doing is, you know, it came from one of our conversations a while back here, is I've started doing introductions to why we worship the way that we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
do you do that you do that in the bulletin, or that's in the worship service you actually talk about it?
Like it's there for me to read to people, you know, so they get it. every
Okay.
Sunday.
Oh,
You know,
really?
why do we worship as Lutherans? And then I have in there, why is the offering a part of worship?
Mm.
And then I have in there what we're doing in communion.
Hmm.
You know,
Do you
because
have a copy of that you can send to me?
I do, but I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I think as soon as I asked it, as soon as it got out, I was like, yeah, he's not going to give me a copy of it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
really
I
enjoying
can send
how
it to
you're like, hey, send me a copy of that constantly with everything. Dude, step it
Huh?
up.
What? Were you talking?
No, he's busting my chops about looking at agreements and covenants and
I'm just kidding. It's
yeah, he's
great.
just kidding. He knows how strong I am emotionally.
I
And so
just,
he's just busting my chops.
oh, now I feel bad.
That was the point.
Now I feel bad.
so-
No, I think that's really great, Will, that you have that stuff. That's something that I've done too. I don't know that I actually put it in there, but it's like, especially after, let's say, like the prayer of the day or confession and forgiveness. And I'm like, all right, so do you guys realize what happened there? Why do we do this? Why do we do this as Christians? Why do we do this as Lutherans?
And that's not something, and I think this is actually a good conversation because we are jumping in on top of each other. I think it's good for this. I think that's something that isn't like maybe what you're saying. Well, that's not something that you just do once. That's something that it has to be repeated. It's almost because it's almost like a, it's almost like a foreign language. Like you have to keep talking about it. You can keep learning it. And even though, I know, an example of that would be I've preached, multiple sermons very, very similar on the 10 Commandments, just because, even though I have the 10 Commandments memorized, it's part of my job to do that. But like realizing that, and I may have shared this in another video, that a predecessor pastor shared with me one time. He said, one of the most arrogant things that pastors do is assume that people always listen to them or that they hear it and get it the first time, and we're so worried about like, how do we not repeat ourselves? How do we become inventive? And it's like, no, there's a lot of stuff. We just have to go over it again and again and again. So when you're saying like, why do we do confession forgiveness? It's not like you tell them that once and then it's like, all right, well, they got it now. Like it's something to be revisited and proclaimed. So you would do that for every, Now, I wasn't saying you're going to do that for every aspect of the service. I guess that kind of gets back to your original question, Will. Some of those things are very specific, either Lutheran or mainline Protestant traditions. So is that, you feel like that's important to get that across them, or just to show like this may be foreign to you, but just so this is why we do it. Like there's a meaning behind it.
Well, I think that that's part of it, right? I think that there is value in people knowing why we do what we do, even if they don't profess to be Lutheran Christians or they don't remain Lutheran Christians. They don't see that as being an important part of who they are long term. But then there's the other aspect, which maybe is a conversation for another day, of what do we believe about people? That is important for everyone to know, that, not everyone believes that, gays are going, gay people are going to hell, right? Not everyone believes that women can't be pastors, right? Not everyone, there are all kinds of things there that, not everyone believes that the whole point of becoming a Christian, living your life the way you do, is to get into heaven. Right. And, I think that we have things to offer in a lot of those conversations for people to wrestle with, whether they, end up agreeing with them, adopting them or not, just to be aware of the fact that there are other ways of looking at the gospel.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that requires obviously intention, like an intentionality. And like you said, maybe earlier, Will, realizing that that's part of our role. I know at seminary, at least I think, and theoretically with like synod stuff, we're the theologian in residence as pastors.
Mhm.
And so part of that responsibility is, we're going to talk about these things. But I admit a fault of my own is I so often approach the readings with sermons, even feeling like, all right, well, you guys already know this story, so let's just do this, and I don't know. I guess maybe striking a balance between the people that know the story and then what do you do? Like, do you cater to one or the other? If you have somebody, if you happen to have somebody there who's there for the first week or who you don't know if they have any experience with the gospel message, do you lean more towards that, or do you lean more towards in presenting your message towards people that, all right, now we have to get into some more of the finer details?
Yeah.
There was, I think it was in whatever it's called now, Living Lutheran or whatever. There's an article about that a retired minister and I think seminary professor wrote that, some unbelievably large percentage of people in laity don't know some of the basic stories, kind of going along with that. It's like, oh, well, Noah's Ark, everybody knows that. Well, people don't. But then it said there's this high percentage of people, even, in the pulpit, that don't know those stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
in the pulpit, yeah.
So I just, personally, I just approach it as, it's, I approach it, I guess I tried to be in the middle, but I think, and I'll chalk it up to the Holy Spirit. I think it falls more to on the side of the fence that people just don't know. And again, I can't, all the stuff we're talking about, I can't take it, I can't take the context of 2020 out of that, I can't, because I just can't. So I think that's a really good question. But I think we mentioned it before too. If we're sitting, or if I were leading a Bible study or something like that, that's really the place where I would dive into, where the theologian in residence would come out. But
right.
Honestly, still, I don't know how more in depth that would get anymore.
Yeah. But I mean, it also goes back to what you were saying earlier, Andrew, of that the audience is bigger. So if the audience is bigger, part of my assumption would be a lot of the audience are people that don't have as much familiarity with it.
Yeah.
And so once again, how does that change, our approach to it? So I think, so we were debating today whether or not we were even going to try to record something. So I'm going to say that I appreciate Will coming up with the topic.
All right, good. I guess that was
That was
see
it.
you later.
Bye.